So podcast this week was with Renee Carriol on the topic of leadership, part of our Ask the Expert series, which I think we have 2 more episodes to go, one on success and one on storytelling. Let's just see who sort of has listened to it. Don't worry if you haven't, you do not have to have listened to it. So the red is I haven't listened to it yet. Growth mindset, you still might. And the green is yes, listen to it. Listen to it already. Let's get a bit of a sense. And then for the people that did listen to it, can you let us know in chat maybe what particularly resonated, or what made you kind of pause and reflect, or like maybe something that you didn't agree with, or anything. Just give us your thoughts. Let us know in chat. For anyone that's had the opportunity to listen to it so far, what stuck out, what resonated, what made you pause and reflect. I have a few things to share from my takeouts, and then Sarah's going to talk about some other stuff to support with thinking on leadership. So let us know in chat, all the people with the stars, a couple of hearts, some random arrows, a blue line. Like the emphasis on emotional intelligence, Mrs. T coaching. Yeah, me too. Kind of talked about that's kind of one of the most important skills for leaders today, is their ability to have emotional intelligence in their relationship. Nua says, I could resonate with the idea of bringing personality to work, but it does require that inclusive environment. I like that perspective. Like whether your ability to be the leader that you want to be is dependent on the environment that you work in. Like, what's that tension like? I've had that before, actually. Definitely an organization that I worked in, the leader that I wanted to be and what I thought leadership was very hard to implement in that organization, and it created quite a lot of tension for me, actually. Yeah, Kerry, I love the importance of being open about making mistakes and making it safe for others to do so. That's one of the things that stuck with me, actually, a point about vulnerability, which I'll share in a second. Feeling really validated that you can be a leader without directly leading a team, Laura. Yeah, absolutely. I found him really, really inclusive in his approach. Like, everyone can be a leader. We need to stop kind of the ego around leadership getting in the way of kind of enabling everybody. And to the point that Kate said there, women leaders more likely to consult than tell. He used the idea of sort of the hybrid working policies that people are creating at the moment. And he said from his experience, a lot of the kind of male executive leaders were a bit more in tell mode, a bit more, here's the policy, quite directive, whereas the female leaders were more in consult mode. And his point was that is much more appropriate when everybody is having a very individual relationship with the work that they do. Then actually what you need to have is a more emotionally intelligent, consultative approach to enable everyone to succeed, rather than the command and control approach that for a long time was kind of the dominant way. Brilliant. Okay, great. I love all the stuff. And yeah, Majama, that point around Spike, his book. So I've just got a couple of things that stuck with me, just to build on some of your points. I liked this quote that he said, that training doesn't make leaders, training makes managers. And the idea that actually you sort of learn to lead by doing, and you've got to work out what you want to be known for and what that looks like for you. There is no course, there is no like tick box list for leaders. There is what makes you, and using that to help other people to be their best. And kind of linked to that, when we asked him to kind of maybe get to a sort of definition of leadership that could help us, because there was a lot that he was sort of bringing into what leadership was. He talked about what leaders effectively do, and what leadership effectively is it's about energizing people towards your vision. And he was like, anyone can be a leader, because, we all have different visions of things that we want to achieve. But what we're really trying to do is energize people, get them motivated, get them engaged, in order to move them towards our vision, the thing that we want to achieve. And that's, there's no hierarchy or level or job title that means that we can't do that. But I think questions are to ask yourself, like coach yourself questions. I would say it's things like, what's the vision that is important to you? Like, what do you want to achieve? And then how can you energize people personally? So if that's the definition of leadership, you've got to work out what is your vision, what is the thing that you want to achieve, and then how are you personally going to energize people, because that's going to be different for all of us. And then the only other thing that I thought here was a point Kerry made. I really like this point that he said, your vulnerability. So when you share your mistakes, when you share what you're struggling with, what you find hard, helps people to try harder without fear. So I really liked that point around how vulnerable are you? How much are you thinking about and talking about and sharing what you're finding hard, the things that aren't kind of going well? Because when you do that as a leader, you create an environment where other people try harder, but without the fear of failure. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing. Also very supportive of Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety. But then the point here as a leader is it can start with you. So that was what stuck with me. So if you haven't listened to it or you haven't got time, hopefully there's a few things there that might either make you think, oh, I will listen to it, or you kind of got a bit of a shortcut. Obviously, these resources, everybody, are here for you as well. So you've got the pod sheet. This is on the website. So this is the pod sheet. So you can download this, and it's got some of those kind of coach yourself questions that you can reflect a little bit more. And this one's like the swipeable summary. We put this one on Instagram, but it's also on amazingif.com. So you've got a few things there that hopefully will help you. I am now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to help us learn even more about leadership.
Thank you. Helpful to have a pen and paper ready for this section, if you've not already, because we're going to go through a bit of a model together in a second. I thought I would just share this one definition of leadership from a guy called John Maxwell, who's been doing writing in leadership and about company culture for a long time. I listened to an episode of another podcast, if you know, there are other podcasts other than Squiggly Careers. Who knew? Called The Knowledge Project. And I really recommend Knowledge Project. It's a much longer listen than something like Squiggly Careers, but they are very good if you really want to get a bit more of an in-depth insight into a topic. And John goes on The Knowledge Project and talks a bit about a lot of his work and about leadership. And one of his phrases is this, which I just think really resonates and is consistent with what Renee says. Leadership is not about titles, positions, or flowcharts. It's about one life influencing another. And I just think that has really stuck with me. And I really like some of his perspectives and attitudes on how we think about leadership. So might be worth a listen, but I've stolen that quote. So let me know in chat now, before I go into sharing something that's really influenced me in terms of my leadership, something that you have read, watched, or listened to that has helped you in terms of thinking about leadership. So I just talked about one podcast there, and in a second I'm going to talk about a book and a model that I'm going to adapt from a book that I found really helpful. But I thought we'd do a bit of curiosity crowdsourcing before I dive in. So anything that you have read, watched, or listened to that you just think that has really helped me with my leadership. Good to great. Jim Collins, yeah, what a ledge. I mean, he really is. Very, very good. Not an easy read, good to great, I wouldn't say. It's I've got it on my bookshelf above me now, and it's quite a thick book. You can also listen to Jim on our podcast. Jim's definitely on Knowledge Project as well. Dare to Lead, Nikki, yeah, that's Brené Brown. Simon Sinek, yeah, a classic. Coaching Habits, I've not read that. That sounds interesting.
I have, it's really good. It's a very practical read.
Daring to Lead, yeah, Brené Brown. Just always good to see if there's anything else that pops up that might be interesting. Be More Pirate, yeah, from Sam Conniff.
I'm feeling really good that 3 of these people so far we've had on the podcast.
Yeah.
We just got to get Brené now.
Yeah, Brené, she's on the list. 1 Minute Manager. I read that a long time ago, Leon, and maybe I should look at that again, because that is, lots of people read that book still. I think it's been around for a while. I went to an event. Brilliant. Yeah, this is not just about books or podcasts, also about events that we've been to. Telegraph Women Mean Business event. Sounds really good. Kate Bingham. I don't know who Kate is, so I have to have a look her up. Still really relevant. Malcolm Gladwell's book. Yeah, I think Malcolm Gladwell's book are really interesting. Probably bigger than leadership, but that can be a really good thing. But it is interesting because there are so many books on leadership. It's just one of those topics that has obviously been interesting. Thanks, Leon. Has been interesting for a long time. This is the book that probably has had the most influence on me in terms of my leadership. I'm going to hold it to camera. Now, it says, why should anyone be led by? It does say Sarah Ellis there, because I have got a personalised copy of this book, but it is, why should anyone be led by you? And the reason I've got a personalised copy is I was taught by the two authors. So they give you it's a very smart marketing tool. They give you a copy with your own name on. And what's interesting about why should anyone be led by you? And there's a really good article that you can read on Harvard Business Review, which for free summarises all the main ideas, is first of all, I think it's a brilliant question. Why should anyone be led by you? It's a good question that we should all ask ourselves. And the other thing I really like about their framing of what they found when they looked at leaders all across the world is that the thing that the best leaders have in common is this, that it's not about a checklist or a blueprint for leadership. It's about this: be yourself more with skill. And I really like the nuances in that definition. For people who know me well, who are in Pod Plus every week, you know that I like things that are not too simplistic, but equally simplistic enough that I can remember them. And so I really like that this takes it beyond just the kind of be yourself. And what they mean here by the more is kind of when we're leading, how can you be the best version of you? How can you keep developing yourself? One of the things that the brilliant leaders all have in common is that they all see themselves as, it's just they're always learning leaders. Leading is not something where you'll ever finish. They've all got that work in progress, that growth mindset. And they do all see it as a responsibility and a skill. It's a skill that you keep learning and developing. And in the back of the book, I often do find this sometimes in some of these brilliant books, they talk to you about the research, and in the back of the book, they do a really helpful practical tool. And I always think, well, I'd start there, but that's probably just how I think about, making things really useful. But in the back of Why Should Anyone Be Led by You, they sort of have like a diagnostic tool that helps you to think about your leadership style right now. So I thought I'm going to do the 15-minute version. So this is without wanting to oversimplify, this is the kind of short version of the 7 areas. When you're thinking about why should anyone be led by you, almost think of each of these 7 as questions to ask yourself. Don't try and do all 7 at the same time. You'll know the answers to some of them already, and you might spot some obvious gaps that you want to go away and think about. So here's our spider diagram of the 7 different areas. So I'm going to go through, talk about each of them, and think about, for you, could you confidently articulate your capabilities in this area, or is it something you want to go away and think a bit more about? So number 1, this is the one where I would hope certainly people who listen to our podcast would be good at. And if not, I hope that we could really help you. And this is really knowing what are your distinctive strengths. So as a leader, rather than trying to be all things to all people, you are clear about what makes you brilliant. Back to that, be yourself more. Do you know what your strength spikes are? Do you know what we would call your super strengths are? And do you know how those apply to your leadership? So not just what you're good at and what you're great at. I always think, what do I want to be known for as a leader? Those people, and there's a few of them now, those people maybe who've been in the teams that I've led, in the different organizations I've worked in, what do I sort of want my leadership legacy to be? What do I want those people to be saying about me when I'm not in the room? And I think when you start to think about these things, there's probably only 2, maybe 3. So there'll be loads of things that you'll need to be good at, maybe even very good at, but there'll probably only be 2 things that as a leader that you'll kind of really stand out. And so have you thought about what makes you distinctive as a leader? Back to that question, why should anyone want to be led by you? And one of the things that I always realized when I started leading teams is one of the things that I always wanted to be the best at was developing my teams. Like, unsurprisingly, developing people. That was the thing that I felt that I was great at. And I think when people worked with me, worked for me, they knew that that was part of the kind of the experience of working with me, that I was always going to take individual and team development really seriously. I put a lot of energy and effort into it. And then that does mean you're probably not quite so good at some other things. So what makes you distinctive as a leader? Second one is about vulnerability. So this is our iceberg here. And it's being clear that no leader is perfect and that it is really important to show vulnerability. However, one of the things that they are really clear about is the best leaders are good at what's called selective vulnerability. So leaders do think about where and when is it helpful to be vulnerable? Because there are moments as a leader, certainly if we think about it, leading organizations, maybe leading teams in a slightly more traditional sense, where people are looking to you for reassurance. And of course, it's okay to say, I don't know. Of course, it's brilliant to ask for help. We want to hear those and see those behaviors in our leaders. So leaders do think consciously about, it's okay to be vulnerable, to let people show what's kind of happening below the surface. But also there are probably times where it's unhelpful to do that. And if I think about the best leaders I've worked for, they were good at this. This is about brilliant judgment, isn't it? About knowing what your team needs and when they need it. So selective vulnerability. Next one, and I sort of use a slightly different word to them here, but I think of this as empathy. So they describe this as being able to read different contexts. So sort of, do you understand what's happening? You know, do you have a feel for what's happening, for when something doesn't feel right, where perhaps the team are not behaving in the way that they would normally behave? Do you kind of really seek to understand other people's worlds rather than just trying to kind of impose your own world on other people? We've talked a bit about empathy before, and they go on to say the reason I use the word empathy is they talk about, are you good at understanding also the people that you don't get on with, that maybe you even dislike? And I think that's part of empathy, spending time with people that you don't agree with, but being prepared to listen and to be curious and to understand. And also not just thinking about the people who are maybe within your sphere, but also clients, customers, suppliers, all of the different people that you work with as part of your role, having that empathy. So how do you feel about your empathy as a leader? The next one's interesting, and I can't draw one, so I'm going to have to go for shapes. Do you conform enough? I think of this as adaptability. So imagine you're a triangle. Slightly meta for first thing on a Thursday morning, I appreciate, but just imagine you're a triangle for a second. By conforming enough, what they mean is not trying to pretend to be anything you're not. We're not trying to be a chameleon here. What we're trying to do is think about, how does that shape show up in different ways depending on what's needed at any point in time? So you stay being a triangle, but that triangle might move in different directions and might look one way, might look another way, might sometimes get bigger, might sometimes get a bit smaller. So the point here is knowing what an organization or what a team needs, and adapting enough. They say conforming enough. I don't love the word conforming, but I do like adapting. I do think we need to be adaptable, and I don't think that means losing authenticity. I actually think this is the mistake that I made when I moved from working in Sainsbury's to working as managing director for a small company. I don't think I did a good enough job at adapting enough in terms of thinking about how my strengths and my empathy and all the other things that I wanted to bring to that organization, sort of doing a good enough job at adapting to the environment that I found myself in. I think I tried to behave in too similar a way to the way that I worked when I was in a very big company, which is very different. So it was a really interesting learning experience for me. So are you good at adapting enough, but while still feeling authentic? These are quite sophisticated skills. So some of these sound hard, it's because they are really hard. And the point that they make, just to reassure you, if any of you are thinking, this now sounds really hard, is when Rob Joffe and Gareth Jones, who wrote Why Should Anyone Be Led By You, when they do this work with some of the best leaders in the world, most of them can't answer this question. So just remember that. So please don't be giving yourself a hard time, especially if it's your first time here today and you're like, this is intense. Don't worry, when Helen leads it, you get like a much easier sort of matrix, whereas I'm like, let's think in all different directions simultaneously.
It's not because I don't think hard. I just like a matrix.
No, I know, you're just brilliant at just making it loads easier. Whereas I'm like, no, let's stay in the nuance. So that's the fourth area. Are you adapting enough? Next one is really interesting, is about social distance. So are you naturally somebody who likes to get very close to people and really understand people? Or do you feel more comfortable with distance? So we all have a natural kind of preference towards distance. Some of us like to be really close to the people that we work with, and some of us are really happy having that distance. I am naturally, partly I think because I'm an introvert and partly because of how I build relationships, I naturally sit over there. Like, I really want to understand people, who they are, and I find that means I have better relationships with people. And there's no right or wrong. Actually, what's the most important thing here is the ability to do this, is to make sure that at times it's really important to close the distance, to get close to people. That's maybe understanding who people are, what's important to them, what their values are. But also, are you able to retain enough distance that maybe you've got to make difficult decisions? And this sounds really, sounds quite bleak saying this, but I actually always found this really helpful. I always used to think, because I was naturally a very close person, if tomorrow I had to make myself and all of my team redundant, because that can happen in any organization, not just big organizations. Like, do I feel that I would be able to do that? And so that's not because I thought that was going to happen, but I was mindful of, I do sometimes need to be able to step away. And sometimes in leadership roles, we do need to be able to do that. So sometimes we can be really close. Sometimes we need to increase our distance because of certain things that we might need to do. So it's just thinking about how comfortable do you feel going kind of back and forward between those kind of two different modes of behaviors and building relationships. Next one, this is an interesting one. Organizational time. And I will put headers on these when I finish, just in case any of the drawings don't necessarily prompt what we're talking about. Organizational time is your ability as a leader in whatever role you're in. Like we say, it's not about how many people work for you or anything like that. Can you spot when things need to speed up? And can you spot when things need to slow down? This is a really interesting skill because essentially it often means asking a difficult question. Often it means going, well, if we were to try and do this in 2 weeks rather than 2 months, what would that look like? Or do we just need to pause for thought here and just be really clear on, are we still heading towards the same objective, or has that objective changed? So doing this, I think, often makes you quite unpopular because you're either putting people under pressure to speed up, to kind of go, okay, well, we're not moving fast enough. We need to be more in prototype mode here. We need to kind of make things happen quicker. Or you need to be that person asking that awkward question about going, we might almost need to kind of unwind a little bit, or perhaps we've gone off one direction and perhaps we need to just pause and just check that is the right direction. I actually often think of this one as essentially the difference between Helen and I. So with Helen, which she's laughing about, so I'm obviously okay to say that, but I always think Helen speeds things up in a way that I have never, ever experienced. I've never worked with someone who can do things as quickly as Helen can, because making it happen and sort of energy and sort of pace is sort of inherent.
I'm literally writing a summary of everything you're saying so I can share it with people after you stopped.
Are you actually doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, at least you're making my point for me.
Evan, coach yourself questions coming your way in 4 minutes, everyone.
So Helen can speed stuff up and get stuff done. I can slow things down. I mean, I can slow pretty much anything down. I can think about things for a long time. I can ask some really good strategic questions. I'm always really clear about why we're doing something, why something's really important. And you can see how both of those things are useful and sometimes unhelpful as well. So again, what you're trying to do as a leader is probably spot where do you naturally go. So I am naturally good at just being really clear at let's just make sure we don't just run off and do things for the sake of it. Let's not waste time on things that we don't need to be doing, because let's be clear about priorities, what's important. That's naturally what I'm kind of good at. I'm good at that future thinking, that strategic thinking. Helen is good at that prototyping, making it happen. Let's learn by doing, let's experiment. You can see how they're both really helpful. So maybe think about, how do you practice the one that you're not naturally as good at, because it will make you uncomfortable. The fact that Helen is doing that right now, I'm like, well, do I get to read those before she's done them? And there's a sense of uncomfortableness already, and a bit of kind of anxiousness.
They're your words.
I know, but then I need to see those words. I need to check, are they exactly what I was intending? Those sorts of things. So I think just recognize that when we are really trying to, I think, test our leadership skills, it will feel uncomfortable at times, because we are expecting a lot of ourselves. We expect a lot of our leaders, and therefore the best leaders expect a lot of themselves. The more you read and kind of learn about this, the more you think, yeah, it's a really tough ask. But the most important thing is not to be brilliant at all of these things simultaneously, is to know where you are and to always be working on them. That's what makes a difference. That's what makes leaders brilliant. All the best leaders I've worked with, it's not like they're all amazing at all of these things, but what they are amazing at is kind of self-awareness, at knowing kind of where they are. And they're always working to get better. They're always working to improve. So organizational time. And then the last one, which again, like I say, each of these are pretty big ones, is about communication. So how well do you communicate? And those communications is really thinking about, where do you communicate at your best? So are you brilliant at writing emails? Like, that's a really important skill. We send a lot of emails. Are you the person who's very good at communicating with words? Are you really good in person? Are you good one-to-one, or are you good inspiring a massive kind of group of people. I have a tendency to seek out very extrovert leaders to work for, which is interesting, and to work with and to found business with. I like working actually with people who are different to me. And so I've watched some of the leaders that I've worked with who were so good with like 200, 300 people in a room, getting those people energized and excited. I once worked for a CEO that when he left, people like rang up and were really sad and were really emotional about this guy leaving, because he was so good at sort of inspiring from a distance, really. Most of these people had never spent time with him in a room or one-to-one, but that was him communicating at his best. He was not as good one-to-one or in smaller groups. And so again, think about, as a leader, you're not trying to be all things. I'm not trying to be that guy, but I do think about, well, where am I good at communicating as a leader? But also, what are some of those skills that I might want to work on? I've worked a lot on making my written communications better, making them simple, straightforward, concise, have really good clarity, because I worked with someone who was very good at that. And it just taught me how useful it is and how helpful it is. And I think I'm so much better at it as a result. Might not be my super strength, but I do think I'm maybe I used to be a 5, and maybe now I'm a bit more like a 7. And if you really want to do this in lots of detail, you can do yourself a little spider diagram. Sometimes in workshops, I do this with people, and you can rate yourself 0 to 5 on each of these. And so I'll do it really quickly. So you end up with a wonky spider web. And then you can think about, in the next 12 months, what would you like your wonky spider web to look like? And so that can just sometimes give you a couple of priority areas to focus on. So when I look at this now, I sort of like to think, okay, well, which is the 1 or 2 areas that I want to improve in? Which were the 1 or 2 the ones that I want to get better in, rather than trying to do everything all at once?
Sarah, can I just get my screen up for 1 second so I can show people those coach self questions and they can screenshot it for themselves?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm just
thinking. Take my screen.
There we go. 1 second.
I've worked you all very, very hard this morning. I hope that was okay.
So if people want to screenshot that's basically the 7 questions that Sarah just talked through to be able to kind of rate yourself on those different dimensions. So maybe we'll also put this on Instagram, on Instagram stories, so that you can get it there as well. But if you just screenshot that, or you can watch this back later today and you'll get those. But I'll stop sharing, Sarah, because I know we're at time and you might have had one other thing that you wanted to say.
I don't think I did, actually. I think I was I think I was done. I was just reading your questions thinking, yeah, they're very good. Helen at her best there. Did you see how worried Sarah was about
yeah, she's like, well, it's because she would want to iterate and improve those questions. That would be Sarah. So thank you very much, everybody. So next week.
No Pod+ next week. No Pod+ next week.
No Pod+.
No, it's half term. We're both on holiday.
Good shout. Yeah, we're both on holiday. Where are you? You're in where? I'm in the Lake District. Yeah, we're not together, but we'll be still connected. Thank you, everybody, for being with us, and we'll be back the following week for our